Hyperinflation is not merely inflation accelerated. It is the moment when money itself ceases to function as a social contract. When I look at hyperinflation through history, I do not begin with wheelbarrows of banknotes or prices changing by the hour, but with a far more fragile substance belief. Money has value only because societies agree to treat it as such, and hyperinflation is what happens when that agreement collapses completely. It is the financial equivalent of a stampede, where no individual action is irrational, yet the collective outcome is ruin. In its earliest appearances, hyperinflation was inseparable from state failure. Ancient Rome offers the first long warning. As the empire expanded, maintaining legions became more expensive than taxation could sustain. Emperors responded by debasing coinage, reducing silver content, while keeping face value unchanged. At first, the change was subtle. Markets adjusted slowly. But over decades, trust eroded. Prices rose not because goods were scarce, but because money was no longer trusted to store value. The Roman economy did not collapse overnight. It fragmented. Barter returned. Local currencies replaced imperial ones. Hyperinflation here was not a spike, but a slow disintegration of monetary unity, showing that inflation becomes catastrophic when debasement outpaces political credibility. The modern phenomenon of hyperinflation, however, emerges most clearly with paper money and mass politics. The French Revolution provides a pivotal case. The revolutionary government issued assignats paper notes, backed by confiscated church land. Initially, the idea was sound monetize assets to stabilize the state. But war, internal conflict, and fiscal desperation led to overissuance. Each new printing promised temporary relief. Each eroded confidence further. Prices spiraled. Hoarding replaced trade. Speculation flourished. Eventually, the assignat became worthless. What history reveals here is critical. Hyperinflation is rarely caused by ignorance. It is caused by governments choosing the least immediately painful option repeatedly until pain becomes total. No case illustrates the enigma of hyperinflation more vividly than Weimar Germany in the early 1920s. Defeat in World War I left Germany politically humiliated and economically broken. Reparations were denominated in foreign currency, while domestic capacity was weak. The state printed money to meet obligations and maintain social order. At first, inflation eased debt and unemployment. But once confidence cracked, velocity exploded. Workers were paid twice a day. Savings evaporated. Middle-class life was destroyed. The tragedy of Weimar hyperinflation was not only economic, it was psychological. Money lost meaning, and with it, faith in institutions. History teaches us that when a currency collapses, democracy often follows. Latin America in the late 20th century provides another dimension. Hyperinflation in countries like Argentina, Bolivia, and Brazil was not driven by war defeat, but by chronic fiscal imbalance and political fragmentation. Governments faced popular pressure to spend weak tax systems and limited access to external borrowing. Printing money became a substitute for reform. Inflation accelerated gradually, then suddenly. In Bolivia, in 1985, monthly inflation exceeded 60,000%. What makes these cases instructive is their ordinariness. Hyperinflation did not require apocalypse. It required persistent denial and the belief that tomorrow's credibility could repair today's excess. Zimbabwe's hyperinflation in the 2000s stripped the phenomenon to its core. Land seizures collapsed agricultural output. Export revenues vanished. The state printed money to pay salaries and maintain authority. Prices doubled daily. Banknotes reached trillion-dollar denominations. Yet even here, history insists on nuance. Hyperinflation was not caused by printing alone. It was caused by the destruction of productive capacity alongside monetary expansion. Money lost value because there was nothing credible behind it. No output, no tax base, no trust. Hyperinflation is never just a monetary event. It is a collapse of the relationship between state economy and society. Across all these cases, a pattern emerges with disturbing consistency. Hyperinflation requires three conditions. First, a state unable or unwilling to fund itself through taxation or borrowing. Second, political pressure that makes spending cuts or reform impossible. Third, a shock war collapse or loss of legitimacy that breaks confidence. Printing money is not the cause. It is the symptom chosen under constraint. Hyperinflation begins when people stop holding money, not because they need goods, but because they expect money to lose value faster than anything else. What makes hyperinflation so destructive is its feedback loop. As prices rise, people spend faster. As velocity increases, prices rise faster still. Contracts become meaningless. Credit disappears. Long-term planning becomes impossible. The economy shrinks, not because resources vanish, but because coordination collapses. History shows that once this loop begins, it cannot be slowed gradually. Hyperinflation ends only through rupture, currency reform, dollarization, political collapse, or authoritarian control. Soft landings do not exist. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of hyperinflation is its asymmetry. Debtors survive. Savers are annihilated. The poor lose access to basics. The connected acquire assets. Inequality explodes overnight. This is why hyperinflation leaves such deep scars in collective memory. Societies that experience it develop lifelong fear of inflation, sometimes to the point of tolerating unemployment and stagnation rather than risk recurrence. Monetary trauma outlives monetary regimes, and yet hyperinflation remains an enigma because it is always dismissed as impossible until it is already underway. Each generation believes its institutions are stronger, its data better, its leaders wiser. History shows otherwise. Hyperinflation does not announce itself as madness. It begins as pragmatism under pressure. It is the final stage of choosing expedience over credibility again and again until credibility disappears entirely. And it is precisely at this moment, when money no longer measures value, but panic, that the deeper lesson of hyperinflation comes into focus as the story turns toward that panic. Because hyperinflation is the point where economics yields completely to psychology, and survival instinct replaces calculation. Once money is no longer trusted to carry value through time, society reverts to a shorter horizon. People stop thinking in months or years and begin thinking in hours. History shows that this temporal collapse is what truly destroys an economy. Production may still exist, skills may remain, resources may be available, but without a credible unit of account, coordination disintegrates. The economy does not merely shrink, it dissolves into fragments. In every historical episode of hyperinflation, one sees the same behavioral transformation. Money becomes something to escape, not to hold. Wages are spent immediately. Goods replace currency as stores of value. Foreign money, gold, land, and durable items become parallel currencies. Barter returns not because people prefer it, but because it is the only remaining language of trust. This process is not chaotic in intent, it is adaptive. Individuals act rationally to protect themselves. The irrationality emerges only at the collective level, where millions of rational escapes destroy the monetary system entirely. What ends hyperinflation is never gradual tightening or gentle persuasion. History is uncompromising on this point. Hyperinflation ends only when the state forcibly changes the rules of belief. In Weimar Germany, it ended with the Rentenmark, backed not by gold, but by credible limits on issuance and fiscal reform. In Bolivia, it ended through shock therapy that eliminated monetary financing overnight. In Zimbabwe, it ended when the national currency was abandoned altogether. The common thread is not technical brilliance, but political resolve. Hyperinflation ends when people believe the state has tied its own hands. This reveals hyperinflation's deepest lesson. Money is a political institution before it is an economic one. Central bank independence, fiscal discipline, and credible taxation are not luxuries. They are psychological anchors. Once these anchors break, no model or policy tool can restore trust incrementally. Trust must be reset, often brutally, often at great social cost. That cost is why hyperinflation is remembered with such fear long after it passes. The shadow of hyperinflation shapes policy far beyond the countries that experienced it. Germany's post-war obsession with price stability, Latin America's embrace of dollarization and inflation targeting, and emerging markets' accumulation of foreign reserves all trace back to hyperinflationary trauma. History shows that societies scarred by monetary collapse will accept extraordinary constraints to avoid repetition. They will tolerate unemployment austerity and slow growth rather than risk the return of a money that melts in their hands. This fear is not irrational. It is historical memory encoded into policy. Yet this memory creates its own paradox. Fear of hyperinflation can become so dominant that it blinds societies to other dangers. Deflation, stagnation, and inequality can persist because inflation is treated as the ultimate evil. History reminds us that monetary stability is not synonymous with economic health. Hyperinflation is catastrophic, but it is not the only form of failure. The challenge is balance to remember hyperinflation without being governed by it. The enigma of hyperinflation then lies in its dual nature. It is both rare and always possible. It requires extreme conditions, yet it emerges from ordinary decisions made under stress. It is not a law of economics, but a breakdown of social order expressed through prices. Hyperinflation is what happens when a society tries to spend its way out of problems it can no longer solve politically. For investors, policymakers, and citizens, the historical lesson is sobering but clear. Watch not just money supply, but legitimacy. Watch not just deficits, but trust in institutions. Watch not just prices, but expectations about tomorrow. Hyperinflation does not announce itself with sirens. It arrives quietly disguised as necessity until it becomes unstoppable. If this journey into the history of hyperinflation has deepened your understanding of money's fragility, I invite you to subscribe and continue exploring these financial histories with me, and to leave a comment sharing which historical case of hyperinflation you believe offers the strongest warning for the modern world, because history shows that money does not lose value all at once. It loses belief first, and once belief is gone, no amount of paper can buy it back.